Okay, and we're back, and we're back up, and it's COMP397. Welcome back. It's Winter 2016 session, Week 3, Lesson 3, Part 1, and I just talked about your first, or another lab that I gave you. You did your first lab before. This lab number 2. Let me just bring that up while I log in. So lab number 2 is all about auto deployment, because one of the things that you have to do, sorry, I'm trying to figure the password out. For this course, for your assignment number 1, is auto deploy to a cloud service. That's one of the requirements, and we'll go over those requirements again today, just in case you've forgotten or you haven't had a chance to really review what those are, right? Because I want everyone to be clear on what's due next week on Friday. Okay, so under Dropbox, like I said, you'll find this Lab 2, Cloud Deployment, and please be mindful of what it says here in terms of the stuff you need to take care of. Again, it's worth 2% of your final mark, right? So it's like a little quiz or a test, but it's basically the other stuff we did last week. So we did 2 things last week. We talked about Create.js, and the other thing we did last week was actually deploy to Azure. So this is your test for last week's deployment. I showed you the deployment last week. Now you're going to actually physically do it, all right? So again, you're going to pick a simple game project as a template. You can pick any of the templates I've given you for this course, Create.js, for COMP397, this kind of stuff, right? Any project that works and that you can actually see, that runs locally on your system, all right? You're going to sign up for Azure if you haven't done it already, like if you didn't do it last week, or if you want to use something else, another cloud service like Heroku or something else that works, you can do that if you're savvy that way. You can follow the steps or see the videos to create a web app, and then after you do that, you're going to go to the publishing piece. And where is that publishing site? So if I go to Portal, just to show you, if I go to portal.azure.com and I log in, right? So I've created my GitHub, GitHub projects, and I log into Azure, right? And when I'm there, I'm going to be taken to this portal where you see a bunch of these little web apps that I've been testing over the last days, right? And all of them are running, by the way. I'm going to shut them all down today, right? Because otherwise, it's just bad. But let me just go here. So I'm adding a new app. I'm going to click the plus, right? And then after I create go to web and mobile, you go to web app. When you go to web app, right, you have to enter a unique name for the app. We're going to do one for today. I'm going to create a space for today anyway because it's lesson 3. So we'll do one for lesson 3. So we'll say comp, again, 397, right? It'll be winter 2016, and it'll be lesson 3, right? So you notice this is a unique name, right? Comp 397, winter 2016, W2016 - lesson 3. It has to be unique across the world. So if you try and put in the same name as your friend, not going to work, right? And then yours should say DreamSpark. If you sign up properly, it should not say pay as you go. Mine says pay as you go because I'm not using DreamSpark, right? You're going to click create. After you click create, you're going to wait for this deployment to finish, right? Like I showed you last time. And when the deployment is finished, you're going to link to a GitHub repository that's already been created. Well, I don't have one yet, so while this is deploying, I'll get back to this. Let's create a GitHub repository. So here's my GitHub repository. I'm going to create one for Centennial. So I'm going to go to Centennial College. And I don't have one. This is stuff from last week or this week just passed, right? So let's make one. So make a new repository here that I'm going to call, Comp 397, and then it's Winter 2016 Lesson 3. All right, so I'm going to use that one as a demo today because we're going to do more stuff with state machines and all this kind of stuff, right? When I do that, I need to create repository. Now, it's an empty repository, right? So please don't give me an empty repository. It has to be working. I have to actually put something up there that works. So I don't have anything yet. But I need a repository to point to, right? I'm just showing you this piece, the connecting Azure to GitHub piece, okay? Even though nothing happens, it won't work like this. But I'm showing you how to connect it. Okay, so Azure's up. It gives me this little settings. I want to scroll down on the right to where I get to publishing. If you don't get this piece, if you can't create your container for your web app, there's 2 possibilities. One, you're not signed up properly with Microsoft DreamSpark and Azure, which means you got to fix that. And that's why I said it's due tonight. I can't make it due today because some of you may have problems. You didn't set it up properly. If it asks you to sign up here instead of giving you this stuff, please sign up. That means something, you haven't completed the verification and sign up process for Microsoft Azure, so please complete that, all right? Then you're going to click on, if everything goes well though, it's going to take you to a screen like this after you've deployed a web app container, that's what it is, and you're going to click continuous deployment. When you click continuous deployment, you're going to choose what you're going to deploy from. I'm going to choose GitHub. Now it's not going to work like I said because it's empty, but let's do it anyway. And I'm going to choose where. So it's not going to be my own self. It's going to be Centennial, because that's where we are, and that's how I've set it up. Yours will say your account name, right? And then choose project. Well, I just made a project, COMP397, Winter 2016 Lesson 3. That's the one that I'm linking to. So I choose that, and then I click OK. And then what it's going to do is it's going to check GitHub. Notice how there's no deployments. It's going to find out that it's empty. It's going to fail. Right? It's going to say there's nothing to transfer. GitHub is empty, right? I'm watching the files, but there's nothing there, right? And notice how no deployments are found because there's nothing on GitHub right now, right? So if I want to link to GitHub, and this is part of this lab, right? So let's take a look at the lab, right? The lab says connect your GitHub to Azure. That's what it is, and use the auto deployment steps with GitHub. I just showed you that, so you know how to do it now. It's also being recorded for tonight if you want to look at this last recording, right? And then once you're done, and if everything's working, I need the GitHub link, right? So for your project that you sent up, and please don't make it an empty project. Make it so that it works, right? The web link provided by Azure, and that would be, if I go back to deployments, that would be this link, COMP397, dash Winter 2016. Lesson 3, AzureWebsites.net. That's this one here, right? That's the link. And then, so that's that link. And then also the note is test it. Make sure it works, guys and girls, because you send me stuff and it doesn't work, that's not complete for me. So you'll lose a bit of a mark there, right? Again, it's out of 2, right? So like, what can I give you? I can give you 0.5, I can give you 1, 1.5, maybe 2 max, right? Those are the kind of, maybe the partitions I can give you. So there's a few steps here. There's 4 steps, right? If somehow you missed one of them, right? Like Azure is not working, you don't have a cloud service, or you didn't give me that link or whatever, you'll lose half a mark, right? Something like that. So you'll probably see it in iterations like that. So you're probably going to either get a half, 0.5, 1, 1.5, or 2. But I hope all of you get 2, which is what you should do for this one. This is like a easy 2% again for you guys to get. All right, so that's what's due. It's due tonight at midnight. All right, and that's, if you notice, that's the due date. It also closes at midnight, which means you can't be late. If you're 1 minute past midnight, 0, right? So please don't do that to yourself. Get it done. And you can get it done today in class while I'm talking, right? You don't have to wait till later on. Something you can do here, okay? All right, so if I go back to deployments, notice there's no deployments. I want to set up a deployment. What were we working with last week? Who remembers what we were working with last week? We had a kind of a project in COMP397. I put in a project I was working with here that we were doing. Does anyone remember? State machine, which is this one, right? So this project is the one that I want to create. I want to make a copy of this project because I want to move from this project on, but I'm going to call it Lesson 3. How do I do that? Well, I copy it, right? Here's, I'm going to just copy the actual project itself, the folder. And I'm going to put it on the background somewhere over here. So I'm going to kind of just right-click and then paste. So here's my project, COMP397 Winter 2016 State Machine. But that's not the project that I want. I want to call it Lesson 3 because this is the one that I want you guys to follow, right? So we're going to be creating a little demo, right, that I'm going to pump up to Azure right now, right? So if I was going to change this, it's still going to, I'm not going to touch any of the code. I'm just using it for demo purposes to send up to GitHub because some people have problems with GitHub still, right? So here's Lesson 3. I need to make some changes to this thing. So I'm going to bring up Visual Studio. And if I bring up Visual Studio and drag and drop, like we normally do, to set up this project as the main project, I can right-click here in Visual Studio, right, code, and bring it up in the terminal or in command prompt. When I do that, I have access to the folder structure. And what I want to do, because it's a different project than the other one, I want to get rid of the .git hidden folder that's here. So to do that, I'm going to do this. On Mac and Linux machines, I'm going to say remove rm minus rf for force, right, and recursive, right, the .git folder. And what it's going to do, it's going to wipe out the .git folder. So there is no tracking right now for this new project, this COMP397 Winter 2016 Lesson 3, which I don't want it to be the same. If I don't remove that, it's going to point to the other one, which is State Machine, which is from last week, which I'm going to use this week. Because this week I got to continue with the State Machine example. I'm just using Lesson 3 to pump up to Azure for you, so you can see the example, the full route that we're going to take, okay? All right, so on Windows, to wipe it out, you have to be able to see hidden files and folders in Windows, and you can use Explorer. If you go to Explorer in Windows, if you see your hidden files and folders, there you'll see a .git folder inside your project structure. If you remove that, it'll be the same as what I just did here, rm-rf .git, right? That's what you need to do. You have to remove that folder. Then I can reinitialize GitHub. So I can go git init. What's the next step that I have to do? So git init initializes. What's step 2? I want to add everything. But before I add everything, I like your thinking, right? I got to check a couple things, right? One is, do I have a git ignore file in this project? If I'm going to deploy to Microsoft, right? There's two possibilities. One, I create a git ignore file, but it's trimmed down. So I don't include things like, I don't want to not track. I want to track almost everything, right? Almost everything. I don't care about typings. That I don't care about, right? But I care about pretty much everything else. Okay, cool. Now here's something that you might also notice. Under scripts, that's where my typings are sitting. Scripts and typings are all underneath each other. And that's okay, right? But I don't necessarily need those. So if I'm going to create a git ignore file, and a git ignore file does what? It tells Git what not to track, stuff that I don't want to send up on GitHub, right? So if I create one here, that's what it would do. In my case, I'm just going to leave it as is. The one thing I do want to change, though, is my index.html file. Notice how it says COMP397 Lesson 2. That's not what it is. It's Lesson 3. And it's in the, just to be clear, it's in the Winter 2016 term, just to be specific, right? So that's one change I made, right? So now I have another file I'm going to add in there. Okay, that's cool. Is there anything else that tells me my version? And that's the other thing you want to check in here. So any kind of other things I want to change for this file, I can change here. Okay, let's go back to here. So someone said git add dot. So that's the next step, git add dot. Now, if I put dot, it means take every file, and I want to track everything, and be ready, put this on the stage. And we're talking about git staging now, not stage as in like create.js stage, okay, just to clarify. So stage these files. I want to stage everything. That's what this means. Okay, cool. What's the next step after my git add dot? Okay, so I did git init, git add dot, number 3 for GitHub. What's the next thing? Not push yet, because I need to commit, right? I need to create my initial commit. So I'll do this. So git commit minus M. What does minus stand for? M stand for message, right? So it's going to be initial commit. There it is, and press enter. So what this does is it adds my entire project as a snapshot, my initial snapshot. It takes it and puts it inside this hidden folder called .git inside my project, right? You can't see it right now, but it exists. And for me to show it to you, right, I'm going to go and on Linux or Mac ls-al, right, it's going to show you everything. You notice that there's a .git folder that's hidden. You can't see this folder, right? So there's .git. Okay, so it's got the folder, but I can't do a push yet. Why not? What do I need? What else do I need to do a push? Where am I pushing to? I need to configure that, right? So up online, if I go to my GitHub, it shows me the code that I need to push to GitHub, which is git remote add origin. Origin means this local folder, this local repository. Push my origin to the master branch, right? So let's configure this thing. So we're going to take this whole thing here. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to go back to my terminal or command prompt, and I'm going to paste it, and then press enter. What this does is it configures my remote repository on GitHub. It says this is what my local repository is pointing to. Okay, that's what it points to. And then I'm going to do my push. So I'm going to say git push -u origin master. Notice that I'm following the exact steps here. With the only change that I made was instead of git readme, git add readme.md, I'm doing a git add dot, which adds everything, not just a readme file. Okay, that's all. So everything is up here on GitHub. It just tells you what to do. All right, and let's just press enter. So what it's going to do is going to take my files and push them up on GitHub. Now, If I refresh GitHub, notice that I have a deployment. And my deployment, oh, see, there's a problem. Look at this. My README file is wrong. It says state machine. That's okay. But notice my deployment now is in Winter 2016 Lesson 3. If I look at my deployments here on Azure, I don't really see anything, right? So if I, oh, there it is. See that? So Azure was watching GitHub the whole time, and now I have my initial commit deployed. So if I click this link, theoretically, and if I, it should work. I should be able to click my COMP397 link. Here it is. And if everything goes well, I should have this hello world. Remember we did that last day? That's where we left off. So this hello world, this spinning hello world is, make sure that this COMP397 Winter 2016 Lesson 3 we just made is deployed to Azure, and that's full circle. That's our process, right? I want you, and I'm going to do this today because I'm going to use the other thing that I made, which is state machine. So I'm going to continue working on that state machine with you, right? Every time I do it, I'm going to deploy to GitHub, and we're going to see live changes up online. All right. And the reason for this is because I want you to practice by putting everything up online all the time, right, from the get-go. So you're always connected to Azure. So you don't have to do that step. So when you create your files for assignment number 1, when you start working on assignment number 1, create a web project up on Azure. Create your GitHub, connect it, right? Do all that stuff. Do all the front work, right, ahead of time. Get your structure done, right? And when your structure's done, all you have to think about now is just going to push to GitHub, push to GitHub, push to GitHub, push to GitHub, and then slowly your files are going to be ready to go. I want you to create a new web app every single time we create an assignment. I don't want you to make one assignment that holds all your apps, okay? That's not what I want, and I won't mark other apps like that. So if I have like one assignment or one site that pushes to everything, I don't want that. I want one site, one assignment, one site, okay? So assignment number 1 for COMP397 from you, it's got to have a unique name or whatever. It's assignment number 1. Assignment number 2, 3, and the project. All right, that's what it's going to be. Is that clear? Because yes. 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 Because you have DreamSpark. Right? So DreamSpark is free and web apps are free, yes. Then you got to fix the problem. You have all tonight to fix the problem. And so if you have a problem, if Microsoft is your problem, send them a support request now and you'll get response before tonight is done. Okay? You have until tonight, till this afternoon, right? What's the problem you're having? It doesn't. A what? Okay, can you help her? Maybe you can give her a hand, right? Because that link should work. And if it doesn't work, you've done something wrong, right? It's really simple, right, to do it. People last week, just letting you know, I've done this DreamSpark Azure deployment, right, on both colleges this week, right, for 6 courses. Every single course that I do is all up on Azure, right, and all through GitHub. And I'm using Azure for everything, Microsoft, and the same technology you see here, it's being done there, right? It's nothing different for different places that I'm doing it, right? Last week, I'm just letting you know, people signed up for Azure, and they did the whole sign-up process correctly. And this week, they have to sign up again, right? It happened. There was a glitch, all right? So if that happens to you, it's not unique. It's not something like, oh, it's just me. It's not just you. It's happened to other people. So if you have a problem with Microsoft Azure, you can fix it. You may need to sign up again or follow the process again or send a ticket to Microsoft to fix it, all right? But you can do it, okay? Yeah.
In a real world scenario, there are some files that you can have from online, like credentials for database or something like that.
You can commit whatever you want online. Should you commit them? The answer is no. Yes, you should not.
How do you have a continuous deployment where you have to have credentials for database and you cannot?
That's a great question. I love that question. So how can you have a continuous deployment? The question is when you have private credentials, listen to my words, private credentials online, right, that you don't want to share with anybody else. Anybody have an idea? You have a private repo. Private repo, no one can see the files, only you and your deployment team, right? It's not available. Even if you went there, it would say, sorry, you don't have access. And so you can still do continuous deployment. There is not really a solution for you to share your files. The public repo way is you would have a git ignore file, right, that would stop those credentials from going up, but then it wouldn't work, right? So, because you need to connect to those things, right? But you have access to private repos. You have 5 private repos if you sign up to that DreamSpark thing. And I know some people tried to do that and they said, This gentleman here was saying, I can't get onto it, right? So remember on DreamSpark, right, if I go to dreamspark.com and just following what you were saying, just to finish up this point of discussion, I can go GitHub for Education. If you click on there, and if you sign up properly, most people have no problems signing up and getting your student pack or whatever. Sometimes it does require a few more steps, and you're going to click support for that. All right, you're going to say support. I tried to sign up and it's not giving. Same thing that you're going to do if you have a problem with Azure, signing up for Azure or whatever. You're going to click support here, right? But you're going to click get your pack, and under your pack, if you notice, like I showed you before, you have this under GitHub. You have 5 free repositories, which is worth $7 a month. Alternatively, if you can't make it work and you want to use GitHub, $7 a month, guys. $7 a month for 3 months. How much is that? $21. So you can get private repositories. Okay. So I don't think it's a lot of money for me for $7 a month, but it's a 5 free repositories, and we're only doing, let's say a few assignments, right? So 3 assignments in a project. So you're good, right? You're okay with those 3, and you can make as many public repositories as you want, right? You don't have to make them private. You can make them public, all the other ones, because they're not your project. So you can any lab we do today, any lesson, anything that's non-critical, you can make it public, right? So it's okay. But for private credentials, if you want to have access, those kind of things, private repositories you want to use. Okay. So that's that question answered. So again, what I highly recommend is after you push this up, one thing you need to have to make it work, and this is where things fail, is if your index.html is not accessible on the root of your folder. So if this index.html is somehow buried inside a content or scripts folder, then you'll get access denied. You can't access this directory or folder, right? This has to be exposed. By the way, this is the same for Node.js. If you create a Node.js application, there's 2 things for Node.js if you want it to run a Node backend. And the reason why I'm mentioning it is someone may choose in this class to run a Node backend server for their game. And the reason why is if I want to keep track of things like high scores, right? I can run it on a Node backend server, right? I can create my own little server, and I can use a JSON file to store, a flat file to store my, my score data if I want to, right? But you need to have, in order for Node to work on Azure, you have to have server.js exposed on the root of your folder, all right? If it's not exposed, you have to point to it somehow because it needs an endpoint. If Microsoft doesn't know where to look, it's going to give you an access denied, all right? So that's one of the reasons why you might get that. Okay, cool. So we've done that whole thing. I've told you how to do your lab now. Again, it's due by the end of tonight. So tonight at midnight, all right? You've got lots of time to do that. And it's a bit of a review of what we did last week. That's why I wanted to cover all this stuff. Let's get into it. I want to not use this project because this is my little example project, lesson 3. I'm going to use the project we used last day. So, and that project is State Machine. Let's go back to that because I want to help you with your assignment number 1. All right, so I'm going to go back to COMP397. I'm going to pull up my Visual Studio Code, and we're just going to drag and drop State Machine, this State Machine into it for a second. So I want to use this one. Okay, so this is my State Machine. It's for you to find it on GitHub. It's COMP397 Winter 2016 State Machine. That's the one I'm going to be using for today and probably for a bit. Okay. All right, so this is our State Machine. Now notice that under our scripts we have some folders that we added in. Right. One of them was the objects folder, and under objects I have a couple of classes that I've kind of included. One is buttons, which we're not using right now, the button class. The other one is label, we haven't used right now either. I could have made the hello world by using my button class. And what I want to cover today is I want to cover modules, right? How to do modules in TypeScript, because we really haven't covered that at length here in this course. We've done it in advanced graphics, I think. So we've talked about modules in advanced graphics. So I want to create a simple module. And what it does is when we create a module, it allows us to think about a module like a namespace. Okay, a module is like a namespace. So first of all, I need to look at my typescriptlang.org documentation. Okay, so let's go to typescriptlang.org. This is your Bible for TypeScript. Okay, everything TypeScript is here. There really isn't anything. There's no tricks here. If you go to handbook, so typescriptlang.org handbook, and if I look down here and I click on modules on the left, what are modules? Modules are like an opportunity for us to split up our code into different files. So I want to split across different files. And if you notice, there's under modules, there's splitting across files. If you look at splitting across files, it's really important to do that. I need the keyword module. That's the first thing I need, to create a module, right? So, and I'm just telling you this explicitly so you've seen it, right? Now, if you've seen it in advanced graphics or in another course before, you're seeing it again, and it's just review for you, right? Because we're going to be doing that every time we do a enterprise level application, something that's large, a game, something that needs more stuff. We can't keep everything in the same module. It's going to kill us, right? So just as a review, and have we talked modules again before from last week? Did we talk about it last week here in this course? No. So we're talking about it for the first time now, right? And I need to talk to you about this because I have modules already in place, right? And you need to understand what they do, okay? So here's my module. It's called, in this particular case, they give an example of validation. To illustrate what a module is, let's go into the playground here. Click play on TypeScript. And I've already got a module up here, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of it. So let's get rid of this module, and I'm just going to kind of go in. So my playground here in TypeScript, I click play, is empty. So when I create a module, I want you to see the effect that we have on JavaScript on the right-hand side. So the first thing I need to type in is module, right? And think about a module as a container for code, right? That's separate from my main class or my main JavaScript file, all right? So module, I need to name it. And you know what? You'll see that I've named a lot of my modules, my first module, objects, right? You can name it whatever you like. It has to make sense. And I'm going to encapsulate this module with curly braces, right? So curly braces tell it this code block is part of this module. Okay. Notice on JavaScript you get nothing. How come? There's nothing there. TypeScript will only transpile if there's something to transpile. This module stuff doesn't do anything right now. All it is just decoration for us. Okay? So let's put something inside. If I want to expose, let's make a module. We're going to do this physically on our class, right? I want to make a new module, but we're going to first we're going to kind of show the examples of how to do this. Notice if I hover over my module name, it says namespace. So modules are like namespaces in other languages. Like, for example, in other language like C or C++, I would use the include, right, to include modules, right? Or how do I include modules or namespaces in C#? What do I do? What's the keyword to include? Using, right? And how about if I want for Java? What's the keyword for namespaces or packages for Java? It's import, right? So that's the idea. Think about modules as packages or namespaces. Okay, that's what I want you to think about them, all right? So here's my package or namespace. It's called objects. It's a module, and I can create a variable. So I'm going to say variable, my variable, right? This is my variable. Let's call it, username, just to keep with the whole security thing you were talking about. So my username, right? And my username is top, right? Nice and easy. Okay, cool. Notice as soon as I assign a variable on the right-hand side, it does something to JavaScript. It actually transpiles it to this ugly thing right here, right? Notice how we have this format right here. Now we talked about this, but maybe someone knows what this is called. This whole structure. What is it called for those people who have done it with me before? Anybody? An IFI. Yes, thank you. I'm so happy you said it. Yes, right. What's an IFI stand for? IFI. Immediately invoked function expression, IIFE, or anonymous self-executing function, right? That's what it is, anonymous self-executing function. So when we created IFE, this structure that you see in JavaScript, it says immediately invoke it. So I don't have to call it. I don't have to call this module. It's immediately invoked. As soon as I attached my module, right, into my index.html file, it's immediately invoked. Everything that's in there is active, right? It becomes part of our namespace. What we say in JavaScript, it becomes cached in our namespace. Okay, so our namespace, our global namespace, now includes a reference to the objects namespace. Okay, notice how objects, right, is a variable, right, as opposed to a module in JavaScript. JavaScript just sees it as a variable, and the variable, remember, variables are just containers, right? They can contain anything. They can contain objects, they can contain data, whatever you want, right? But in TypeScript, TypeScript is very strict. Do I have access to my variable username with this code? Look over here. Do I have access outside of this iffy to this username variable outside of this structure? The answer is no, right? You don't see any way of getting it out. It's local to this structure, just like this is. For me to have access to some kind of data, whether it's a variable, here's the stuff you can put in a module, a function, a class, an interface, a static class, whatever you want to expose outside of a module, so from inside to outside of the module, you need the export keyword, okay? So I'm going to use this. Now let's see what happens over here when I put the export keyword in. So I go export, and I press space, and now look what it is. I have objects.username. I've actually attached my username in JavaScript to the objects variable. So now it's exposed, right? Before, it was not. It was just another variable called username inside this closure, right? Okay, but now, once I use the export keyword, I can access my username. And how do I access it? Well, it looks like this, objects.username, right? Because I use the dot accessor to access my anything that I expose inside my module. So I have a namespace, it's a container, right? It's a separate file, and I'm using the key, I'm just calling it objects. You can call your module whatever you want, something that makes sense, okay? I'm calling it objects because I'm gonna put a bunch of game objects in there. I could have called my module game objects, right? Every time I refer to something that I'm exposing in the module, it's the module name, dot, and whatever I'm exposing, the object I'm exposing, my variable, my function, my class, whatever it is, okay? So let's try this out. So I can do this, and I can also, just adding some space here, I can also export, right, a function that I name. So here's, you know, kind of thing like, I don't know, let's make a function called login, all right? So if, let's say I had a login function, right? And my login function returns void, right? So I can do that. I can export my login function, and notice over here I have a function within a function on JavaScript. That's how JavaScript writes it, right? And you notice how, because I've exported the function, right, my login function now is available outside of my module. How is it available, you can ask, because I don't see it available over here. So exported, and it's returning void. But notice that I'm not doing anything with it. I don't have anything inside. So for me, let's say if I put a console.log, check what happens now. Console.log, logged in, let's say. We're going to fake a login. Logged in, right? Again, notice how my objects.login now is attached, right, to my objects object, right? So my object's object, or variable, has a login method that's attached to it now, just like we attached the username variable, right? As soon as we put something inside of it, or we do something with this module, it's available outside of the module, right? Now we have to use the export keyword, okay? I'm showing you the JavaScript so you see what's going on, right? So we have to be aware of what's happening on the other side here. Okay, cool. So that's a function example. So here's a function example, right? In a module. So what would I use a function? It's just a simple function. Why would I put a function just hanging loosely in a module? Why would I do that? Would there ever be a need for doing this, or a reason? Anybody? A module, but I have in my module I just have a function that's loose. There's no class to it or anything. Just have a function that I can access. Why would I do that? I like your thinking, to perform a specific task. And the reason for that, maybe a utility function that I don't want to tie to a class. And it's more functional programming like. It's not what we want to do here. We want to use more object-oriented programming methodology, right? So it's not great practice for us, right? But you could do it, is what I'm saying. Okay, so don't say it can't be done. If you see it like this in a module, it's normal. It's okay. It's not illegal, right? Same thing with my variable. Here's my variable example. So I could do this example as well, but again, it'd be like, the only reason why I want to expose a variable, more often I want to expose it as a constant, right? So if I had a constant, like for example, in TypeScript, we can also define constants. Like for example, if I have something like, you know, width. If I had width as a constant, and height, which is a number, right? And I said my width is, you know, I don't know, 640. That's pretty valid. By the way, I missed something over here. I should have declared the type, which is string. But if I don't declare the type of string, does it assign a string anyway? And the answer is yes, through type inference, right? Whatever we assign to the variable, automatically TypeScript knows that it's that type. Okay, cool. So this is valid, this is valid, this is a constant. So constant example. This is very common. This makes sense. If I have a constant and I want to set up a constant config file, I can do that. Notice how in JavaScript, it's just another variable, right? It's just another property. That's what JavaScript sees the width as. It's not a constant. There is no constant in JavaScript, right? Okay, and then here's a class example. So I do a class. Oops, how did I do that? I do a class, right? And I have to export it. Class, and let's call the class something else. For example, my person class that we made before, right? And I can create it's almost another piece of code that I'm gonna add here. And let's say, for example, I have a constructor for the class. Here's my constructor. And in my constructor, I want to take in my name variable, right? So I'm gonna kind of take in the name, which is a string, right? And then inside my class, I also want to declare some instance variables. So let's say we'll call them private instance variables. So here's my private instance variables, and we're going to use the private keyword for that. Private, we can do that. And remember, we kind of did this example before, so it's kind of like an underscore name. We're going to use underscore as to indicate private. We talked about this a couple times. And it's a string, a type string. And I can do something like this. I can say, well, this dot underscore name is equal to name, and that's a very common structure, right? And then underneath that, let's make a method. So here's our public methods, and under that we can use the public keyword to expose stuff publicly, right? So it's available. And let's say we're going to use the speak method. Speaks. It's going to return void. And you know what? Our speaks method is going to say console.log. This dot underscore name plus in quotations space says hello, right? Like Tom says hello as an example of that. So that's it right there. Okay, so that's cool. So I've got a couple of examples here. I've got a variable, a constant, a function, and here's a class. And notice I have to use the export keyword for the class as well. And in my class, I have a very simple example of a private string variable, and it's a name, and I assign the name that I'm getting from my constructor to my private variable. So public constructor, private variable. That's how I assign the value. And I have a public speaks method that I take the name instance variable or member variable, and I concatenate it with says hello to the console. Notice the structure that's going on here. And the reason why I've made this is so that you can see the JavaScript that's going on the other side, right? This is really key to look at, right? So, all this, and then it does this. And notice what it does. I create another closure. Here's another iffy. So it's like an iffy within an iffy. That's what a class does, right? So another function, a self-executing anonymous function inside of a self-executing anonymous function. That's what happens when you create these two, another class, right? And notice how inside this closure, I also have this function, but I also use this prototype keyword to declare speaks as a method that's related to the person class. That's how you do it in JavaScript. Again, to me, much more difficult to learn vanilla JavaScript like this, and it's much longer to write, and there's lots of chances for errors, right, because of the syntax. Here, human readable. We understand constructors, we understand methods, we understand how to write simple things. There's less chance for error, and TypeScript is going to help us with code hinting and code coloring to make sure that we're good. All right, so a module, just to recap, is a container that can contain and expose variables, constants, functions, classes, interfaces. We haven't covered that. I'm not going to cover that today. And other things. All right? But you need to use the export keyword. If you don't use the export keyword, whatever you have inside the module is not exposed. It's hidden from the rest of the code. It's not cached to the rest of the code. Okay? So this is part one. Part one is you write your module and then you export anything you want to expose, right, to your class. Part one. Part two is you need to use your index.html as a manifest to tie in the new module, okay? I mean, if it's not attached to your index.html, just like any other JavaScript stuff, right, it won't be attached to your project. Even if the module is there, if it's not listed, you know, using a script tag in your index.html, it won't attach, it won't work, right? That's number two. Three, you need to have a reference to that module with a triple forward slash and the angle brackets. So triple forward slash angle bracket reference path equals to and whatever the module path is. Okay, that's what you need. So those three things you need. And it says it right here. If you go to learn, and if I go to handbook, right, and if I go back to modules for a second, right, and if I go to splitting across files, you can see that I have this reference path here for the module name. I need to have a reference path. And I also need to actually include this in my index.html. Let's do a real world example, all right? Because I've shown you modules, we need to attach one, and I already have one here in my files. So here's my VS Code. Here's my VS Code. And notice how I have an objects folder. Here's my objects folder, right? And in my objects folder, I have a module called objects. Guess what? I have another module called objects. Here, did I double declare my module? What happens when I have more than one module declaration like this, but in different files? What does that do you think? It merges everything, because when it goes back to JavaScript at the end of the day, it just caches that too, right? So I can expand my namespace by adding additional variables, constants, and classes and interfaces into my namespace to create my own API, if you will, right? By building out that API, by splitting across different files. So it's really flexible. Now, do I have to create an objects folder? No, I don't. I'm creating an objects folder to create a structure for you guys to organize all modules, all my module files that are related to the objects module. I don't have to, but I do it because it's organized. So I make my objects folder only to organize. And then underneath that, I put all files related to the objects module. All right, cool. I've done that also for states. Notice I have one state called menu, my menu state. And my menu state we got to fix because we got some problems, right? We got some problems in my menu state. I got a scene with a container, but I don't have any kind of, you know, hello label here and all this. I want to fix all this stuff, right? Hello TypeScript works, but I want to fix it so that it all works and I don't get these errors. We're going to get back to this in a second. But I have one module, but the module is called states. And look, it's under the states folder just to keep consistent with my structure. Let's make a config module that keeps track of my screen size. My screen size is 640 by 480. I want to make a config folder, and in there a config module, right? Let's do that. So again, you might have seen this. Look, I already have a config module, and inside there I have my config file, and notice my module name is config, and this time I'm exporting a bunch of variables, but they look like constants. Now this is an older file that I'm using. So nowadays with the latest version of TypeScript, by the way, TypeScript has been updated to 1.8 beta for those people who care. I go to constant like this. I can change these to constants. Now remember, when it transpiles, this whole thing will go back to variables. But constants in TypeScript, we use them so that it prevents any overwrite. So here's some stuff. I have some constants in my config file. How would I access my menu state? It would be like this. It would be config, dot menu state, right? Or config dot place state. I've actually configured some constants for my state machine. I'm creating constants so that I can say I can test for them. I make a switch statement when I create a state machine. I create a switch structure, right? And who remembers what a switch statement looks like? You guys have seen it in lots of other programming languages, right? It actually comes from C, right, back in the day. And I have it here in my game.ts file. If you go to core, and if I go to my game.ts file, it's here. It's my switch statement should be at the bottom of my game.ts file, right? If I look way at the bottom here, here's my state machine. I've actually got it hidden here, right? This is the beginnings of my state machine. Notice I check for the state. I say, is it a menu state? Yes, then show the menu. Is it a play state? Yes, show my first level. Is it the game over state? Well then, show my game over screen. Okay, so that's the way I do my state machine. We use a switch structure to do that. And I'm using my config module to access these enumerations, if you will. Enumerations, config module. Do I really need to use a config module? I don't know. Let's take a look. Well, guess what? Some basic types that have been added lately to, I'm talking about over the last year or so, to TypeScript is enum, or enumeration, right? And enumerations can be used to set up, a structure instead of my constants that I used. Okay. We're not going to do that right now, just because I don't want to confuse the crap out of you guys, right? Because there's just another data type you're learning, right? And I wanted to get you guys started, right? So if I go back here, I want to go back to my config module for a second. On my config module, I have my menu state, and these things are for my states. Okay, that's what it is. So here's my state constants. Let's add a couple more constants, and I want you to help me here. I want to create a couple more constants for my width, the width and the height of my screen. Okay, so when I want to know my width and my height, I also want to know, the center of my screen, the exact center, right? So what is the center X and center Y? Why would I know that? Why would I want to know those things? Center X and center Y of my screen. Yeah, if I want to center something like some kind of, a hello label or something, I don't want to hard code values in there. I want to put it in my configs, and then I can go back to one file, change the number, and it changes everywhere, right? That's the right thing to do, right? And I can use my menu state, play state, over state, width, height, all these things that I've already configured as constants, right? And I just have to change it one place, and then it changes. If I use that reference, a value, everywhere throughout my code, instead of hard coding the value, right? I can just change one thing and it changes everything. If I use a hard coded number, 1, 2, 640, 480, and if I change my mind tomorrow and I want to make a game that's 1024 by 768, I got to go look through my entire code and go, where's my 640? Replace 640 by 1024. Replace, it's too much. And sometimes it can cause errors, right? This way reduces the chance of errors, and it's good planning. All right, so let's do that. And plus, it reads nicer than 640. What's 640? You don't know what it is. It could be the screen size, width, or height. We don't know, right? So let's do that. So we'll say screen constants, right? Well, here's something you can do with screen constants. I can create a static class, right? What's a static class? I did this in advanced graphics, so please forgive me and bear with me while I do this, because you're learning it twice. Sorry, that? I don't need to instantiate objects of the class. I can just use properties, static properties, and methods of the class without instantiating the class. Okay, that's what I can do with static classes, right? How do I declare a static class inside of a module, right? Well, I still need to expose it. So let's do this. I'll say export, right? And we'll still call it class. Here's my class. Remember, I can do this because it's a mod. I can do different things in a module, right? So in my class, I want to call this class my screen. Here's my screen class, right? And my screen class is encapsulated with curly braces, right? Now, so far it looks normal, right? It's not a static class of anything. It's not the static class in TypeScript, it's the static members that we're accessing, right? So let's talk about this. I need a static member, so I use the word static, right? And do I need to use public? If I go public static, is that possible in TypeScript? And it is. So public static, and then I got to name what the static public static member is. For example, if this is the screen class, and I want to use width, height, it's almost like a little folder that I'm going to use within, almost like a closure within my closure. I've got my namespace, config, and then underneath that there's going to be screen. So screen, config.screen.width, config.screen.height, and so on, right? So the first one is width, which is a number, which I'm going to assign to 640, right? Notice that it's not a constant. It's a static member of my screen class. Okay, it's a little different than using a constant. Here's another one, public, static, right? And then inside there we do height, and then number, and then we know it's 480, right? If I want to do center screen or center X, probably be the better way to do it, because we can't do center screen, because center screen would have two values, X and Y, right? Let's do that. So public, static, let's do a couple more. So we'll call it center. And usually when we do two words, we split across an underscore. So center X, right, which is a number. And what's the center X of my screen? If my width is 640, then it's 320. So I don't have to, why would I do that? Well, I don't have to calculate, and less calculations means better performance, right? I can just use a number. I know it's my center screen is 320. I don't have to think about it. I don't have to do that calculation again, right? And same thing goes with my center Y, right? So I can do that, center Y. So center Y, which is also a number, and it's 240, right? Okay, cool. So I've got my stuff here. I'm going to transpile. So Command-Shift-B on the Mac, Control-Shift-B on Windows, right? And when I transpile, it converts this thing. Now it shows me I have a few errors. I got to go back there and fix them, and we'll see where they are. Don't worry about those. Okay, cool. My module. It's cool. If I look at my index.html, notice that all my modules that I've included here, including my config module, here's my config module, they're all included inside my index.html, because my index.html acts as a manifest, right, for my entire project. Think about it as tying everything together, right? I can't have a game without my index.html. Okay, I need to tie everything together. Okay, and it's not lesson 2. We're doing this is called state machine. So we're going to change that, state machine. All right, cool. We're going to get to the state machine eventually, I swear. Okay, cool. So we've got this. We've tied it in. We still see some errors. We got to find out what those errors are. And I know where the errors are. They're under menu. Now, notice how it says, if I hover over, it says, cannot find name scene, right? Well, the only reason why I wouldn't be able to find the name scene is somehow I haven't exposed it on the global scope, right? And yet it still works. If I go back to my game.ts file, right? And do I have a scene object, right? And the answer is I don't. Notice how I don't have a scene right now for my menu, right? I have a stage, right? But I don't have a scene because we got rid of it. Remember, scene was down here. I made something called scene, which was just another create.js container, right? We're going to talk about this again when we kind of make our own container class, right? I want to make a scene class. What is my scene class going to need? Think about that, and we'll come back, okay? Well, let's look at my regular. This is the non-scene class. I have a main function, a main function, right? And I have this game loop. I have my game loop, right? Okay, cool. My main function, my game loop, and probably some kind of constructor, right? That's what my scene class would need. So instead of a game loop, I wouldn't call it game loop. I would call it update, right? And instead of my main, I wouldn't call it main. I'd probably call it something like start. So when my scene starts, right, what does it start with? It starts with all this stuff, right? Okay, cool. I don't have the scene yet, and I don't care about transpiling this one, so let's leave the errors alone. It'll still transpile without them, right? If you really want to be a stickler, you can always just comment all this stuff out because there is no global scene variable. That's why it's not working, okay? It doesn't know what scene is. There is no global start button object. So that's why you're getting all these errors, because I've commented it all out here on the bottom, right? That's why it's not showing up. Okay, cool. So we've got our new conventions. Notice that, do I have anywhere in here that I can replace any hard-coded values that you can see? Is there? Yeah, there is. Look, 320 and 240. They're right here, right? And also, there's some other stuff too. Let's talk about the import keyword. In TypeScript, I can use the import keyword to declare aliases, right, of other structures. So on the top, right, before my global variables, I can do something like this. If I want to create aliases for my namespaces, I could do it like this. I can say, well, you know, import. I can use my import statement, right? And I can say, I'm going to import something that I'm going to call my screen, right? My screen. And instead of me doing config.screen. I want to just call it screen, capital S. So let's call this, just call it screen. I'm going to say screen is equal to what? Config.screen, right? And if I do it properly, and if it's not clashing, right? If it's not clashing, it says, I got an import declaration, you know, clash, because somewhere it could be in my code, by the way. It could also be in my create.js somewhere or other libraries. Screen is actually a keyword that's being used. It was the same thing in 3JS when we did it the last time. Okay, so screen, not a great choice. But what if I change this to something small, like for example, cscreen, like I did last time. So if I say cscreen is config.screen, right? I can do that. I can create shortcuts. I can even do that for create.js. So if I say create.js is C, I can do something like stupid like this. C, right, lowercase c is equal to create.js, right? And some people do that. Some people make little shortcuts for that. Why? Because it's easier for me to do C dot than create.js dot. That's why. Right? And so you might see this kind of stuff. I won't do this here, just so I don't confuse you. But you could. But let me use this import statement, because we want to use this. Import screen, right, is config screen. Okay, that's what it means. Okay, so if that's cool, down here in my hello label, I could do something like this. I could do config.screen. And then we know that my hello label is going to be center X. So I'm going to choose center X. Right? Notice I can access that. Now it makes more sense, right? It's more human readable that my hello label X is the center X of the screen. Right? I could also use my shortcut. I can say cscreen, right, dot center Y, right? But that's not as human readable. Even though it's a shortcut and it works, it doesn't make any logical sense. And it's not like we're running out of space. So although you can do it, and it works out to be better for me from a human readability perspective if I use this. It's a little longer, but I understand what it means. So that's what I'm going to do. So config dot screen dot and then center Y. That makes more sense. So we don't need this. I'm just showing you that you can do it. You can use the import statement to create aliases. All right? As long as you're importing a class or something else. Okay, cool. So we've done that. We've got my my screen and my stuff done. What else can we do? Where else can I create aliases? Or sorry, I can use. Where else can I use some constants, or if you will, some screen configs? Where else can you see that I would probably use it? Anybody have an idea? It's actually right in my face right here, right? Sorry? Here? That's not really. That's kind of like something we put into play. How about this? Right? 60 frames per second. I could put in FPS, screen.fps or game.fps. And that's another kind of constant, a game constant. So this is my screen constant. So if I go back to constants, right? So here's my config thing. So here's my export, my public static class, right? My static class that I'm using only for screen, but maybe I have another one for game, right? So let's do that. So I have my game constants. So here's my game constants. There we go. And in my game constants, I'll do that. I'll say export class. It'll be the game class that's inside of my config, right? As an example. Now we got to be careful here with naming, right? Because once we name something, it'll be named. But is config.game different than something else .game ? It is, right? It's a totally different namespace, right? So it's okay. So I'm going to say again public static, and we'll make this FPS, right? And we'll call it, it's a number, and we'll set it to 60. So we're going to add to that because there's going to be other game constants we're going to use. And I'm going to transpile. By the way, there's other closures I can use here other than class. I can use interface, which is also a good closure, or enum, right? Okay, let's go back to game.ts. So in my 60 frames per second up here, where it says 60, I can put in that, that static shortcut, right? That looks, so it's config.game. And then FPS, right? So my, frames per second that I'm using, that's in my config file. Now this is a little bit more cryptic, right? It's a little bit more cryptic here, right? And I'm going to take this comment, so just so we don't lose the comment, right? I'm going to take the comment here, and I'm going to go up here and press, just put it over here so you can see what the comment looks like so it doesn't go away. So I'm going to configure my frame rate. That's what this is. Actually, let me comment some of this so you understand what it all does. So this, create a reference to the HTML element, HTML canvas element. That's what this does, this line. And this one, right, creates our main, display list container. That's what this is. This is for all of our game objects. That's what this does. And this one, just to split this off, this one, basically create an event listener, right? To count off frames. So that's what this is doing really. So it's going to count each frame, right? And my event handler is my game loop. That's what this is. This game loop is the main game loop function that handles what happens each tick, right? Each frame. So every frame, this thing here, this function triggers. It goes off. It's almost like I'm pressing the button on the function every single frame. 60 frames per second, keeps doing it. Now it's not going to go this slow like on my fingers going right now. It's going to go really, really fast, right? Because 60 frames per second. And this main function here happens only once, right? I don't do this main function more than one time. This is almost like, this function is executed one time. So what would this do? It makes my hello label, and it adds my hello label to my stage. That's what it does, right? Okay, this is a great place to stop. I'm going to send this up to GitHub so we can see the difference and see if it works. But first, I want to test locally. I always want to test locally before I upload to GitHub and by relation, right? Deploy to Azure. I don't want to deploy a broken site to Azure ever, right? So I want to test locally first. So let's transpile, and I want to go down here and I want to expose this in the terminal or command prompt on Windows. And then I want to do a couple things. I still want to add my commit, so I'm going to say git add dot git commit -m, and I'll say updated config module. That's what we did. So we added to the config module basically, and press enter. I'm not going to push it yet though. I've created a commit, but I haven't pushed it. I want to test my commit first. All right, so let's test it first. So now I'm going to go in here and right click, and I'm going to go reveal in Finder or Explorer on the Windows machines. Notice how I'm in COMP397, my folder, and I'm going to double click. Now most times, if I'm not using a lot of image files, I can just double click here and we're good, right? Here it is. Let me refresh that to make sure that it's not. So it's working. Everything is normal. And if you notice, if I right click here and go inspect, right, I can certainly go back to console, right, and see that the game has started. Also, I can look at sources. If I look at sources here, I can see that under scripts, I can see my whole source structure here for my front end stuff. Here it is. So scripts, here's my core, here's my game.js, and notice that I've added it. I know that it's the latest version because it has all my comments, right? My game.js. I don't have my game.ts here because remember, TS doesn't get added into the browser, but all my folder structure and everything, all these files are cached inside of my browser right now. Yes.
Can you debug the TypeScript inside the browser just as you do with JavaScript?
Almost. The great thing about it is that on the console, if you use we use map files, those source maps, it'll tell you not just the JS, but notice how I'm getting the, I can also get TS. Any problems in the TypeScript file, it'll show here too, right? So you can actually directly do exactly where it is. But you can still do everything else though. If I wanted to look at something like, I know that I have a config dot, if I want to do a console log, let's try this out here. So right on the browser, if I do console.log, and I want to say, I want to know what my config dot game dot FPS is. I'll type it in, config dot game, right, dot FPS. Notice I have availability of that module, and it'll tell me that it's 60, right? So I have access to all my variables right here, right, in the browser. Okay, just to note. And that means I can do things like change this. Like I can change my hello world, theoretically, to something else. It's called hello label, right? So I should be able to say something like this. Hello labeled, dot text is equal to goodbye world or something else, right? Okay, let's try this out here. I'll do right in the browser for you. So down here I'll say, well, my hello label, right? Oops, not hell. Hello label, there's no code hinting, dot text, right, is equal to, and I'll say there's, something like goodbye world, goodbye. Now it's going to cause mayhem, right? World. But how about goodbye cruel world? No code hinting. And it's weird. Yeah. Oh. And look how it changed right away. So right here it's like goodbye cruel world. Now how come it's not centered? It measured hello world when I did my centering, my registration point. Didn't center this new thing I put in. And I changed it right in the browser. By the way, this is the security hole that exists for all JavaScript applications on the front end. If I can go into the files and look at the source files, this is, by the way, from like JavaScript 101. And if you actually do any kind of JavaScript applications, I can always go in, if I have access to the JavaScript files like I do here, and modify any variable to test or mess around with. That's dangerous if you know what to do, right? Example would be a game. I want to give my high score 5,000, right? I want to change my, my lives to 10, right? Whatever, right? Yeah. You cannot. As long as you know, if you know what you know, if you know what you and I know now, I'm just showing you, unless you bury your files on the back end, like if you use Node as an example, and you put all your back end logic on the back end and only expose your game on the front end, right? So you do a front end back end separation, which is really quite challenging to do if you don't know what you're doing, then you wouldn't see your back end files at all. They'd be hidden, right? But that means you'd have to run a Node server to protect the front end. That's the only way. And so that you can hold all your game things or whatever on the back end. But still, on the front end, you would still see all the variables. It'd be still exposed. So the answer is you probably couldn't. You can't stop it from happening. The one thing you can stop from happening is you can change the default behavior of your right-click in your web page. So you can say, change my default behavior so there isn't a right-click. You can't see a right-click, right? Because right-click gives me my inspect, right? But then I can always go through the menu. I can always go through here, and I can always go to more tools, and then I can always go to developer tools, and I can see it this way, right? So I can always go in there and look at it. So there's always a way around it. Hackers for ages have been able to go and hack around with a website and whatever. And that's why it's like you said earlier, you got to watch that you're not exposing things like username and password inside on your front end. It always should be on your back end, something that you can never see. And it's inside of a session variable from a session storage perspective or a token, as opposed to something that's a clear text password. If it's a clear text password or username, you're in trouble, right? You want to protect that, right? Questions around what I've done here. So all I've done is review, and I talked about modules today. So if you're going to get a test next week, guess what you're going to be tested on? Modules, right? How do I connect modules? I create a module file. A file name is a TS name. It's got to be .ts. I use the module keyword, and I use the export keyword to export anything I want to expose in the module. Classes, variables, constants, interfaces, whatever, right? I attach them to my index.html. That's number 2. So in my index.html, my module, like for example my config module, has to be attached a reference in a script. And number 3, I have to include a reference to the module, right, somewhere in my code. An example here, in my reference.ts file, I reference all my references, right? So I included my config.ts here in my reference path, right? If I don't include it, it can't connect, right? These are the 3 steps you need for every module. You can't do modules unless you have those 3 pieces. Something will not work properly. Okay. Let's take a short break. When we get back to doing state machine, right? Which is what I really want to get into. And then we'll talk a little bit more about your assignment number 1. Hopefully it'll help you to get things going, right? We'll talk about a little bit of story ideas. I want you guys to pull up your hands and say, my story is about blah, blah, blah. Okay, we'll talk about that.